wind and wave. Steam was the first comer in the new powers. It was the beginning of the age of energy that was to close the long history of the warring states. But for a long time men did not realize the importance of this novelty. They would not recognize, they were not able to recognize that anything fundamental had happened to their immemorial necessities. They called the steam engine the iron horse, and pretended that they had made the most partial of substitutions. Steam machinery and factory production were visibly revolutionizing the conditions of industrial production. Population was streaming steadily in from the countryside and concentrating in hitherto unthought of masses about a few city centers. Food was coming to them over enormous distances, upon a scale that made the one sole precedent, the corn ships of imperial Rome, a petty incident, and a huge migration of peoples between Europe and Western Asia and America was in progress, and nobody seems to have realized that something new had come into human life, a strange swirl different altogether from any previous circling and mutation, a swirl like the swirl when at last the lock gates begin to open after a long phase of accumulating water and eddying inactivity. The sober Englishman at the close of the 19th century could sit at his breakfast table, decide between tea from Ceylon or coffee from Brazil, devour an egg from France with some Danish ham, or eat a New Zealand chop, wind up his breakfast with a West Indian banana, glance at the latest telegrams from all the world, scrutinize the prices current of his geographically distributed investments in South Africa, Japan, and Egypt, and tell the two children he had begotten, in the place of his father's 8, that he thought the world changed very little. They must play cricket, keep their hair cut, go to the old school he had gone to, shirk the lessons he had shirked, learn a few scraps of Horace and Virgil and Homer for the confusion of cads, and all would be well with them. Section 5. Electricity, though it was perhaps the earlier of the two to be studied, invaded the common life of men a few decades after the exploitation of steam. To electricity also, in spite of its provocative nearness all about him, mankind had been utterly blind for incalculable ages. Could anything be more emphatic than the appeal of electricity for attention? It thundered at man's ears. It signaled to him in blinding flashes. Occasionally it killed him, and he could not see it as a thing that concerned him enough to merit study. It came into the house with the cat on any dry day, and crackled insinuatingly whenever he stroked her fur. It rotted his metals when he put them together. There is no single record that anyone questioned why the cat's fur crackles, or why hair is so unruly to brush on a frosty day, before the 16th century. For endless years man seems to have done this very successful best not to think about it at all, until this new spirit of the seeker turned itself to these things. How often things must have been seen and dismissed as unimportant before the speculative eye and the movement of vision came! It was Gilbert, Queen Elizabeth's court physician, who first puzzled his brains with rubbed amber and bits of glass and silk and shellac, and so began the quickening of the human mind to the existence of this universal presence. And even then the science of electricity remained a mere little group of curious facts for nearly 200 years, connected perhaps with magnetism, a mere guess that, perhaps with the lightning. Frogs' legs must have hung by copper hooks from iron railings, and twitched upon countless occasions, before Galvani saw them. Except for the lighting conductor, it was 250 years after Gilbert before electricity stepped out of the cabinet of scientific curiosities into the life of the common man. Then suddenly, in the half-century between 1880 and 1930, it ousted the steam engine and took over traction. It ousted every other form of household heating, abolished distance with the perfected wireless telephone and the telephotograph. Section 6. And there was an extraordinary mental resistance to discovery and invention for at least 100 years after the scientific revolution had begun. Each new thing made its way into practice against a skepticism that amounted at times to hostility. One writer upon these subjects gives a funny little domestic conversation that happened, he says, in the year 1898, within 10 years, that is to say, of the time when the first aviators were fairly on the wing. He tells us how he sat at his desk in his study and conversed with his little boy. His little boy was in profound trouble. He felt he had to speak very seriously to his father, and as he was a kindly little boy, he did not want to do it too harshly. This is what happened. "I wish, Daddy," he said, coming to his point, "that you wouldn't write all this stuff about flying. The chaps rot me." "Yes," said his father. "And old Broomy, the head, I mean, he rots me. Everybody rots me." "But there's going to be flying, quite soon." The little boy was too well bred to say what he thought of that. "Anyhow," he said, "I wish you wouldn't write about it." "You'll fly, lots of times, before you die," the father assured him. The little boy looked unhappy. The father hesitated. Then he opened a drawer and took out a blurred and underdeveloped photograph. "Come and look at this," he said. The little boy came round to him. The photograph showed a stream and a meadow beyond, and some trees, and in the air a black pencil-like object with flat wings on either side of it. It was the first record of the first apparatus heavier than air that ever maintained itself in the air by mechanical force. Across the margin was written, "Here we go up, 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 from S. P. Langley, Smithsonian Institution, Washington." The father watched the effect of this reassuring document upon his son. "Well?" he said. "That," said the schoolboy, after reflection, "is only a model." "Model today, man tomorrow." The boy seemed divided in his allegiance. Then he decided for what he believed quite firmly to be omniscience. "But old Broomy," he said, "he told all the boys in his class only yesterday, no man will ever fly. No one, he says, who has ever shot grouse or pheasants on the wing would ever believe anything of the sort." Yet that boy lived to fly across the Atlantic and edit his father's reminiscences. Section 7. At the close of the 19th century, as a multitude of passages in the literature of that time witnesses, it was thought that the fact that man had at last had successful and profitable dealings with the steam that scalded him and the electricity that flashed and banged about the sky at him was an amazing and perhaps a culminating exercise of his intelligence and his intellectual courage. The air of Nunc Dimittis sounds in some of these writings. "The great things are discovered," wrote Gerald Brown in his summary of the 19th century. "For us there remains little but the working out of detail. The spirit of the seeker was still rare in the world, education was unskilled, unstimulating, scholarly, but little valued, and few people even then could have realized that science was still but the flimsiest of trial sketches and discovery scarcely beginning. No one seems to have been afraid of science and its possibilities. Yet now, when there had been but a score or so of seekers, there were many thousands, and for one needle of speculation that had been probing the curtain of appearances